It's one of those things I'll never kind of forget. I had just signed a new deal with Imperial Motion, and we needed somebody to capture, everything I was doing, whether it was just living my life or traveling. And I knew how important my relationship was with a photographer, so I decided to, look into different photographers and see who I'd work well with. And I remember, hearing from Michael Powell, another pro surfer, and he was saying he had shot with Benton, and Benton did great work. And so Michael gave me Benton's information, and I gave Benton a call.
Wanted to get breakfast and to just give him a call back, was interested in shooting photos, yada, yada, yada. And yeah, I wanted to go get breakfast. And I remember going upstairs and just because I was out in the front yard of me and my girlfriend's place at the time, and when I got his message, and I remember telling him, or telling Kira, I was like, I was like, why does this dude want to get breakfast, If he just wants to shoot surf photos, let's just get up when the waves are good, There's no reason to go and all get breakfast and be all buddy-buddy.
As I started to open up about myself and talk to him some, it was a really kind of unique moment, because in not so many words, he basically alluded to me like, Dave, I know, okay, I know what you believe. Like, I know who you are, and I don't want to hear one effing word about it. And I just remember thinking I kind of smiled on the inside, because in that moment I realized that you've just drawn a target on yourself.
Yeah, but little did I know that at the time it was, it was something that, it was just crazy. Looking back on it in retrospect, it was something that it was a complete life change. And it's, I never would have, if you told me 3 or 4 years ago that this is what my life would be like, I'd tell you to get lost.
You've just made it to where it's like you've just told me that you don't want me to share my faith with you. And I knew that this was going to be one of the greatest challenges, because I'm a talker, and I'm not going to be able to talk to him about the Lord. I'm going to have to live it.
I think the next swell we got up, or maybe it was it was a super small day, I think. And it was knee-high waves. And he took out a finless longboard. And we actually got a couple sick shots, and then that's kind of how, I don't know, we just had a good time. And I thought that, I still wasn't sure what to think about him. I thought he was cool. I thought he was a little weird. But everybody's a little weird. And weird is a good thing, but yeah, and then it just kind of took off from there.
The first project that we really did together was the Make-A-Wish Foundation. There was a kid, his name was Robin, and he had a dream to be a pro surfer. And so I had the opportunity and the blessing to be able to invest in this kid's life for a day. And so I called up one of my friends who was a video guy, and called up Benton, so that we could fully give this kid the full experience. And part of the reason why it was so important for me to have Benton there was I knew that he needed to see more than a surfer. He needed to see a life that was lived out, that was about other people. We ended up going on a trip for ESM, and we head to Nicaragua.
Dude, Nicaragua was really the time where, honestly, I can't say it but dude, that's where my whole, things changed for me. Towards the end of the trip, that's where things changed.
I remember sitting in a hammock, and Benton and I, we had known each other now for probably a little over a month. And I'm sitting in this hammock and just kind of reflecting on that thought of being humbled by the Lord. And it's already been humbling, because I've seen how much better everybody is than me on a trip. And Benton walks out, and he goes, Dave, what are you thinking? I always knew that if Benton asked me a question, I was going to give him an honest answer, regardless of if it involved the Lord or not. And this was the first moment ever I was actually able to say something about the Lord. And I shared with him, like, well, man, like, I'm thinking about humility and what I really, need to improve my life, and how humility needs to be a part of my life, and I need to humble myself. And I remember, it was funny, Ben kind of looked at me really weird, and he's like, what are you talking about? The funny thing about Benton was he used to know how to kind of weave a tapestry of F-bombs. It was like one of the funniest things I've ever seen. And so, I mean, he's just looking at me, he's like, you're nuts, dude. He's like, he's with all the other surfers on the trip, and he's just going like, you're the one guy who's nice, who's trying to help people. And I just remember relaying with Benton in that moment, as I was laying in that hammock, that no, like, Benton, like, there's so many things I could work on in my life. And there's so many things I can improve. My life's not perfect. I have issues, I have serious issues.
That's when the Lord started working on my heart, like was then. And because I remember, the water housing was giving me troubles. We were down to the last day. We were flying out, taking a cab or the rental car back to the airport that afternoon, and we had one last morning session in us. And I remember, the main focus was me and Dave going out together. All the other guys paddled out with us, but my main focus was getting shots of Dave.
And so we start to paddle out, and as we paddle out, I'm looking back, always kind of checking on him, and I make it out, and I turn around and look back, and Benton's gone in. And so I turn around and I go in, and I go up and I said, hey man, what's happened?
Yeah, and the water housing, dude, it was just a pain in the butt. It flooded, came back in, dealt with that.
That's where it was like the Lord spoke to me and said, you need to pray for him. You need to pray for his equipment. Because Benton was kind of at that point freaking out about the fact of like water leaking into his housing, water leaking into, and ruining his camera. And I remember as soon as it was like, you need to pray for him, going like, no, man. It was like, there was the other side of it where Satan's like, man, you better not pray for this guy, because if nothing happens, and if none of this works, Benton's gonna go further away. He's gonna think this God thing that you believe in, this, like, all this is crap. And so we ended up finding crazy glue and fix the button. And Benton goes, all right, I'm gonna go out. And so I go and I wax my board, and I get ready to head back out. And as I'm walking down there, I'm like, man, if Satan's working on me this hard for me to not actually go pray with Benton, this is probably pretty important. And so I looked, and I started walking down to the water. As I get down there, I get about 5 steps from him. And Benton turns around and he looks up at me.
And I asked Dave to say a prayer.
And I just started laughing, because I was just like, I said, man, that's exactly what I've come to do. And he goes, oh, all right. And I'll never forget that moment, because I laid one hand on Benton, and I laid one hand on his camera. And I just remember saying, Lord, and I prayed out loud for him, and I just said, Lord, I know how much you love Benton. And therefore, you have an immense interest in the things that he cares about. So Lord, please protect his gear. If it means something to somebody you love it too. So protect his gear and help us get this.
Yeah, and he prayed, and no joke, dude, the Lord answered our prayers. We paddled out. I was able to swim out. No joke, I was able to swim for 2.5 hours without the water housing leaking at all. And we got like three or four good shots. A really rad sequence of him pulling into a barrel. And honestly, after we got, a handful of shots, the housing started leaking. And yeah, and that's when I was like, you know what? like we got our stuff, let's just go in. And we went in, looked at the camera, saw that there were no water drops, nothing. The photos looked rad. We were stoked.
And it was like the housing lasted long enough for us to get that photo. And so when he went and he plugged the image in and I was upstairs, I just remember hearing the guys downstairs just kind of be like, dude, that photo's sick. And in that moment, I knew that we got the photo. And Benton came upstairs and shut the door behind him and came into my room. And he goes, Dave, I can't say that I never believed in God, but I sure as hell never believed that he answers your prayers.
And yeah, and I was like, man, like, dude, is this real? Like, is God real? Like, what the heck, full on like a prayer answered.
And this photo will always show me that God is real and that he listens to us when we call out and when we pray.
And then I remember another thing crazy about that trip is on the way home we were talking, we was like, dude, wouldn't it be rad to go on a trip just together, like where we could kind of do our own thing. And and Dave and I are like in that respect where we like to invest into the people in other countries and not just go there and surf their waves and do all that and not invest into them.
We head to El Salvador next, and
yeah, that's where Dave and I's friendship really was able to grow, and that's where my faith continued to grow.
And I remember we started having housing issues again, and it was just funny. So we're kind of going through those same issues.
And I just had the worst string of luck with water housings. And then, man, and it's just crazy. Like, Dave's personality and his perspective on life was really just like, dude, it's like, what are you on? Like, what is this guy on? Because I want to be on that.
We're shooting this lookbook, and I remember one day we were going up to this volcano. We wanted to go shoot up there, and we just kind of wanted to explore El Salvador. And I'll never forget, because it was the first time Benton just flat out asked me. He looks at me and he just goes, Dave, when did you first realize that God was real? And as we drove up, I just kind of started explaining to him, like, I've gone through things in my life. Deaths of a father, deaths of people around me, a lot of hardship. And I realized that I have a God who can look at all this stuff I'm going through, and he sees it like a storm. But God is so big, he's outside the storm, and he sees the beginning, he sees the end, so he knows it's gonna be better, but he also knows how to get me through it. And it was, I'll never forget that. Benton just yells, stop. And we stop, and we look to our left, and at that point we had made it to the top of the volcano, and we look out, and sure enough, there's this storm in the middle of it. And you could see the beginning of the storm, you could see the end of the storm.
It was a rad trip, but it wasn't about surfing. It was, but it wasn't. And that's what was really unique about that trip. And it really, and I remember after El Salvador is when I started going to church. And I started going to church.
We come home from that experience, and we'd had a few other talks about the Lord, but Benton was in such a different place by this time that, Christmas was coming up, and I felt like, the only thing I could do now is I could actually probably get him a Bible and let him ask, these own questions when he reads the Word, or, get him a Bible and he can kind of look into it and read it now that he's kind of listened to me a little bit and he's more open to it. So I got him one. And he comes over to the house. I gave it to him at Christmas time. And I said, man, if you ever have any questions, like, just ask me. Well, I was hanging out at our boutique that my wife and I own, and sure enough, Benton comes running up. It's raining, and he has something tucked under his shirt. And goes, Dave, can I ask you some questions? And he pulls his Bible out. And I go, yeah. So we go upstairs to our office, and he opens his Bible. And he goes, explain what this means. And he opened up to the portion of Scripture that says the cost of being a disciple. Basically the cost of, what is the cost if I decide to follow Jesus? Well, you're not going to ask questions about that unless you're considering it. And I just remember smiling, thinking back to the beginning and going like, man, now this guy's considering it. And so I explained the things to him. And after that, he'd asked, hey, can we, and Benton slowly became my best friend. And, he was the guy who I'd hang out with, who I'd share a life with. And then finally he asked if he can go to church. And I remember sitting there in church and, just kind of going like, man, I can't even look over at him because I believe the Lord has been doing something in his life. And he means so much to me. Like, if he even hints at making a decision for the Lord, I'm going to lose it. And so I remember like our pastor had finished, speaking and all this. And one of the things I love is he always gives an invitation if somebody wants to accept the Lord. And I remember, like, I'm somebody who I love actually looking and seeing people accept the Lord, because to me there's nothing greater. But this was so different that if I even saw him hint at raising his hand or doing something, so I actually had to turn my back away from him because I couldn't even fathom it, because I knew I'd just erupt into tears. And so, church ended, we left, and I didn't think anything of it. He didn't say anything to me. And about a week later, I was getting ready to leave and go to dinner, and I get this phone call from Benton. And he goes, he goes, Dave, when I was at church with you, he's like, I know I didn't say anything, but that day I decided to accept the Lord. And I just had to call and I had to let you know. And I just couldn't contain it. Just because I've always wondered why I've been given a surf career. I'm not the best surfer. I'm not. But when he called that day, everything made sense. My career made sense. And I realized, like, my career wasn't about me. My surf career was actually about Benton Sampson. And there was nothing greater I could ever do in my life and in my career than share eternity with somebody. And it changed my life. And it's one of those things that I'll never be the same. It's like, surfing's great. It's fun. But in the end, it means nothing. I remember telling my wife that I told her, and this was after I met Benton, if you were to tell me I could never touch a surfboard, I could never get in the ocean again, I could never ride another wave. Would I sacrifice all that so Benton Sampson would come to know the Lord? And this was before I went to Nicaragua with him. And I told my wife, I said I would sacrifice all. I would give up everything for Benton to come to know the Lord. And it just blows my mind to think that the Lord goes, man, Dave, you don't have to give all that up. I'll give you the things you want. I'll give you the desires of your heart. Because if your heart's aligned with mine, I love Benton. And I love you, and I care about the things you care about. And he did that.
My soul